Today I'm going to tell you about a project we're working on at the Census Bureau for changing how we do international and privacy-preserving data science. So the XD team, we're a small group within the Census Bureau. We work on new and emerging technologies, including pets, trying to transform and rethink how the government does some of the services it provides. So today I want to talk about the Census Bureau's mission and our commitment to privacy, how we currently conduct international data collaborations, how this project is rethinking those processes, what we've learned so far, and some of the things we want to do in the future. So first, our commitment to privacy. So the Census Bureau is one of the few government institutions that's actually mandated in the Constitution. We have a contrast where we want to provide privacy to citizens within our data sets, but also share the work we're doing, be a good data provider for researchers, for international collaborators, for private sector institutions. And so if you work with anybody at the Census Bureau, it's usually not too long before you hear about Title 13 and Title 26. So we've heard a lot today about how different regulations are or are not being applied to the private sector. It's a very different story in the public sector. Private data can never be published by the Census Bureau. We can't share it, even with other government agencies often. And any Census Bureau employee has to take an oath to uphold these laws under penalty of steep fines and even jail time. So Title 13 deals with Census Bureau data specifically, and Title 26 pertains to tax data when we interact and work with the Internal Revenue Service. So if we were going to do a data collaboration with another nation, how would the Census Bureau do that today? Let's say, hypothetically, we have a data scientist in Mexico. They want to learn maybe a little bit about the economy of the United States and Canada, to how it's maybe being impacted by a trade deal or some policy change that the Mexican government's considering. So currently, if you want to do research with census data, one of the easiest ways, and easy I put in air quotes, is with the Federal Statistical Research Data Centers. So these are physical locations spread throughout the US that host data. They're usually at government facilities or a lot of academic partner institutions as well. Researchers that use these facilities have to get what's called special sworn status, which is almost taking the same oaths that a Census Bureau employee has as far as not sharing the data you see. It can be pretty onerous to get this permission, and especially even more onerous if you're not a US citizen. It might require you to reside in the United States for a number of years, for example. And you can see through this map that even though there's dozens of facilities, they're not equally spread out across the country. So even if you're within the US, it might be kind of onerous for you to go to one of these facilities and conduct research. So in the more international context, we tend to handle collaborations on a case-by-case basis. So it might depend on things like the United States' relation with the country that the researcher is residing in or working on behalf of. A lot of data that we do make available is in an aggregated form. So again, we're not sharing private data. We do this with international bodies like the UN and the OECD. Sometimes this data can be export controlled, meaning it can't even leave the US borders. Some other types of data we do make available on online platforms like USA Trade. And this is all in the context of trade data. So if our Mexican data scientist wants to work with something like healthcare or immigration data, that could be a whole different step or set of processes. So how is this project that XD is working on kind of rethinking some of these paradigms? So we call this our Project Pleiades. On XD, all of our PETS projects have different stellar acronyms. The objective here is to do a pilot demonstration of an international privacy-preserving data join, and we're doing this in conjunction with the United Nations Pet Lab and also the National Statistical Organizations, the equivalent of the Census Bureau in other countries, specifically ISTAT in Italy and StatCan. And we're also working with a nonprofit open source group called OpenMind, and we're utilizing their platform PySyft. So the tagline for PySyft is that it allows you to perform data science on data that remains in someone else's server. And I'll show the data flow for this platform and how we're using it on this UN Pets Lab project. But to do that, I have to outline a couple terms here. So there's the data owner, who is in control of the private data that a data scientist wants access to. So the data owner might be a Census Bureau and a StatCan employee, and the data scientist in Mexico is trying to write maybe Python code to run on those private data sets in the other countries. There might be what's known as an ambassador. This is not a diplomat, but somebody who might act as an intermediary between the data scientist and data owner. And they're going to use what's called a domain server and a gateway server. So the domain servers host the data. The gateway server acts as a bridge between those domains. So this is the data flow, and I'm going to go through this step by step. So first, our data scientist has a sample of mock data that's built by the data owner, the data ambassador, to see what schema the private data has, so they can start to build a query against that mock data. Once they've kind of built their Python query, they think they're going to get the result that they want. They then send that actual request to the ambassador node. So the ambassador node in this case might be somebody at the Census Bureau that doesn't have access to Title 13 protected data, but they might be, say, a security researcher that's going to review that Python code for other reasons. If they give it the OK, they can then send that request on to the data owners. So in this case, again, we're looking at StatCan and US Census private data owners. They're going to review the code on their side. If they each think it looks OK, that it's not going to reveal any privacy, it's going to get results that they're OK with sharing with the data scientist, they can each approve it. If they are happy with the result that comes out of the private computation, again, the data scientist does not have any access to this. They can then send the real data result back to the ambassador, who might review it again before passing it on finally to the data scientist directly. So again, at no point in this process has the data scientist actually seen the data hosted on the high side domains, we call them, that are the private data owned by these NSOs in the US and Canada. So comparing these two methods, we've talked about the traditional methods that require a lot of different steps. You have to go through getting special sworn status. You might have to physically go to an FSRDC. If you're trying to share data across borders, there might be more restrictions, or you have to create a data sharing agreement, or you might just have to settle for some large types of aggregate data. Whereas with PySyft, you can host this private data on a domain that the data scientist doesn't have access to directly, but nevertheless can create Python code that they can then send to the data owners, who can review it. If they find the code acceptable, then they can run the code on their own data, private data servers without the data scientists ever actually seeing that result. So the current state of this project is that we've just performed a phase 1 kind of pilot demonstration of this project. So we did perform a mock private data on actual open trade data. The Census Bureau has been playing around with how we want to deploy OpenMind's PySyft platform. This project's also requiring us to rethink a lot about how we deploy privacy-enhancing technologies around the Census Bureau and government more generally. And we're working on a white paper on this project that we'll publish on Census Bureau's own research projects website. So I think a lot of these lessons have been said in various ways in other talks today, but PETs are promising, but a lot of the current implementations are still in pre-production development. We're not yet getting to the phase where we can actually run this on real private data, but we're demonstrating how we might get there and clearing a path to that day. And as I said, we're deploying PET systems is being rethinked. We have to kind of come up to speed on best practices when it comes to deploying applications in the cloud. This is also, I think, one of the main benefits for this project is it's going to make us have more conversations around how we talk about privacy, how we talk about data disclosure. So what does access mean in the context of PETs, for example, when before, if it was Title 13 data, it was almost impossible to get any access to at all. So this project is, in a lot of our XD projects, we kind of think about them in 3 phases. So one is doing an open data pilot demonstration. Stage 2, we might move to synthetic data. We will move to synthetic data based on private data before moving to phase 3, which will be actual private data, and getting more and more buy-in and collaboration among government agencies and some open source groups are working with. We want to continue adding partnerships to this trade data, so we might be working with other countries like Mexico in the near future, exploring other types of data, You can wrap in other pets, such as differential privacy, into PySyft. So if you're writing that Python code, for example, you can maybe add an OpenDP method to request a differentially private result. And then we're rethinking infrastructure and how pets and pets-related projects get talked about in government contexts. So here's a couple links for some of the different organizations and projects we've talked about. And that's all. Thank you very much.